Thank you very much. As all of you know, here in sophisticated New York, State Department and Defense Department often don't get along. So it may come as a surprise to you, it certainly comes as a surprise to me, that I agree with every word of what Stapleton Roy just said. In fact, I believe our team wants to adopt him as a fourth member of our team because he essentially is speaking in favor of the motion as we see it. And I want to ask for your support for the motion in the way we define the two key words in the motion. The first word is beware, and we take that to mean be wary. Be wary. The second key word, Bill Gertz went over 11 examples, is trouble, spells trouble. In other words, the burden on the other team to earn your vote is to say you should not beware, you should be blithely sort of confident that there'll be no problems at all with China. They have to sustain that case. Then they have to sustain the case that there'll be no trouble from China forever. It seems to me it should be unanimous tonight that our team is going to win, especially since Stapleton Roy essentially is working for us. I do want to say he characterized the Defense Department's view of China quite correctly. That's very accurate. Going back for 15 years now, Secretaries of Defense and Chairmen of the Joint Chiefs have said over and over and over that China is not a threat to the United States. In fact, often they embellish and say China for the foreseeable future will not be a threat. So that's the public position of the Pentagon. It's not looking for a war. There's a very high level of confidence that we would prevail in any conflict with China. And what you actually get is a series of factual reports each year that come out that list the 11 examples of trouble that Bill Gertz gave as factual matters. But Mr. Roy, Ambassador Roy is correct that there's a sense of confidence and not seeking any sort of conflict from China in the Pentagon. There's also a sense of that China is not a threat. And frankly, I have, since we're telling autobiographical stories, I've had about 35 years meeting with Chinese generals. From the first meeting up here in the United Nations, not far from here, all the way to last week when a delegation of generals was hosted by us in the Pentagon. Enormous changes have taken place, but not necessarily for the better. If you go back all the way to the beginning of the U.S. military relationship with the Chinese communists, it's really 1944, when we began to do some intelligence cooperation against the Japanese in the middle of World War II. That came out of something called the Dixie Mission that some of you, I think, in the audience looked like you remember it. But 6 years later, we were at war with China, a tragic, tragic war, where the Chinese to this day claim they warned us. They used this strange phrase about we won't put our hands in our sleeves, and that was supposed to mean we're going to send 300,000 troops in and destroy American forces. We didn't understand it that way, and a tragic, avoidable war took place. 20 years of containment passed. Another cycle began of military cooperation between the U.S. and China. Our generals and theirs have met hundreds of times. We in the 80s, under President Reagan, who certainly would yield to nobody in his anti-communism, President Reagan authorized the sale of 6 American sophisticated weapon systems to China. It was again a peak, like 1944, when we were cooperating closely with the Chinese. You almost couldn't have had more security cooperation than we did under President Reagan with China. 3 years later, 1989, it had to all be canceled, and not far from here out in Bethpage, Long Island, 2 Chinese jet fighters, sort of MiG-23 jet fighters, had to be crated up and sent back to China, and we refunded part of their money because of the Tiananmen incident and the heart-wrenching effect it had on American hopes for democracy and human rights in China. Then the last 15 or 16 years, there have been ups and downs, as Stapleton Roy correctly pointed out, but we've never gotten a pledge from China not to use force against Taiwan. We've never settled, we've never really gotten credit for what Henry Kissinger did. President Nixon withdrew American nuclear weapons from Taiwan. President Nixon severed the military connection. President Carter severed the fact that we kept 2 American generals there, one for arms supply, one to plan war with the defense of Taiwan in mind. The Chinese take those major concessions from us as though they never happened. And the Chinese rhetoric today continues to talk about how the U.S., if it even sells one bullet to Taiwan, this somehow strengthens the independence forces on Taiwan. It's simply not true. We have enormous self-imposed restrictions on our arms sales to Taiwan. So across the board, we have a lack of progress in Chinese nationalistic attitudes toward America. If you pull out an average Chinese Youth Daily article today, and you look up what does it say about the United States, it's not very friendly. We have 15 major programs now in foreign aid, in helping their banking system through our Treasury Department. Our Labor Department has a mediation service going to help them with labor disputes. Every department of the U.S. government has what, in my view, amounts to an aid program, a program of engagement with China. Very seldom mentioned in the Chinese press. If you're a young Chinese, you have the impression that America is trying to dismember China, that America poses a military threat, that America is working with India and Japan to somehow crush China or contain its rise. All of this nationalistic rhetoric ought to be banned in the Chinese press. We don't say these things in our press, but it hasn't stopped. The worst was 1999, I might point out, when the front page of the Communist Party Daily, People's Daily, carried a long article called "The 7 Ways America is Worse Than Nazi Germany." And it went into detail about which kind of gas the Nazis had used in their camps. And then there was a paragraph, I'll never forget it, saying the Americans are even worse than that.
1 minute.
So, to support our side of this debate, you have to be wary. That is, look for possibilities that might happen in the future where things will not be as rosy as we may have hoped. And you have to admit there's trouble. That's all we ask for our side. And I hope it will be unanimous. But we don't have to be, our side doesn't have to be extreme. We don't have to be alarmist about China. We don't have to forecast an inevitable war. We don't have to say that we should break off all relations. I mentioned to you the 15 aid programs. I want to close in my last sentence with just one of the most impressive to me. We have more than 50 agreements, governmental agreements, to transfer American scientific findings to China for free. Our National Science Foundation and our White House Office of Science and Technology Policy are in charge of this. Chinese don't really make a big deal out of it, but it's an amazing program when you
Michael
think about
Pillsbury, I'm afraid your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.